And the result was so profound that it changed the manifestations around us.
A lot of their consciousness comes from fear and disconnection too, right? Because I mean, it's like us and them rather than abundance.
This is an amazing topic with an amazing guest, Barbara With, and we'll introduce her in a few minutes. But we're going to talk about world peace, and it starts with you. So one person at a time, beginning with you. So imagine all the people living life in peace. And I think that each and every one of us would love to live in peace. So Barbara, tell the audience a little bit about who you are, and then how are we going to find a way to live in peace, I think is the big question.
Well, let me just briefly give you my background of how I got to where I am. And starting very young, I was a musician. I started playing piano when I was 5. I started writing songs when I was 12. And by the time I was out of high school, I went on the road in music for about 20 years. So my vision and my intention for all that time was that I was going to be a rock star. And everything I had, every passion, every moment, everything was sacrificed for that. And along the way, I was introduced to a woman who gave readings. I was 16 or so, before recording devices, said Grandma. And, and that's where I was introduced to channeling, although we didn't call it channeling. It was just Mike's mom would close her eyes and she had a picture of Jesus and light a candle, and she would go somewhere and not remember what she said and tell these most beautiful things, mostly about how to self-love. In retrospect, I'd sum it up that way. There were predictions, but there was more just like helping maneuver through the conflicts with my mother and such. So I studied with her for many years while I was headed to be this rock star. And when I started to automatic write in 1987, it was through my typing. So I knew what it was. I knew what channeling was. I was surprised I was doing it. But that's how I started actually being a channel. And Eunice said she was an antenna. So there weren't any dead people, there weren't any angels, it was just an antenna picking up the highest good. And that's what I did. I went forward just giving friends readings, and I think I charged $25, and then I learned to speak it after writing it. And in 1993, I wanted to do a group. What would these voices say? It was always the voice of we. And what would they say to a bunch of people? So I couldn't find anyone in my clients. But then synchronistically, I was sent first Teresa, who came as a referral, and she sent 5 or 6 of her girlfriends, and then she sent her best friend, Kim. And Kim was not someone who you would ever have gone for a reading for any reason. She was a businesswoman who wore pearls and matching bags and helped her daddy build World Aerospace business. So she was in such crisis. She finally broke down, and that was the beginning of what we called the psychic sorority. So we started to hold groups. We held our first group in December of 1993, and the girls asked, "Who are you?" And they said, "You can call us angels." And I'm a fairly skeptical person by nature. I think it's a good thing. I think healthy skepticism is good. And plus, I was always an antenna. So wait, who were these angels? But the angels said that they had this theoretical process that they felt like if everybody on earth would do it, the byproduct would be world peace. And then in the meantime, it would make your wildest dreams come true, is how they said it the first time when I scoffed. Like, what? And so we started doing these groups, and they said they had this process and they needed people to test it on, real conflict. And we said, okay. Sure enough, we had our first real conflict and pulled the transcript and everything. That's how Conflict Revolution was born, as we just sort of groped our way through trying to figure, well, what does this mean? And how do you do this? And what's that? But we did. We applied right in the middle. I'm like, you. And Kim was like, you. And we pulled out the transcript and it said, if you're involved in a conflict, your root is within you. And like a swooshing sound in the room, we all kind of took a breath like, oh, and I was like, okay, here's what I need to do. And Kim was like, here's what I need to do. And the result was so profound that it changed the manifestations around us. For example, I was working at a nightclub in Minneapolis singing, and there was a waitress there who for 2 years just didn't like me, or she was cold, or she never said anything. And I don't care, I've worked with a lot of waitresses, whatever. I went in that night, she couldn't get enough of me. Barbara, do you like Patti Smith? I've got a bunch of cassettes. And she put $20 in my tip jar, and I thought, aha, this is what they're saying. If we do it here, the byproduct is a piece that naturally manifests in the environment beyond what you can go at in the arena where the conflict is playing out. So that was really the beginning of all of this research. And Diaries of a Psychic Sorority, Talking with the Angels, were our diaries, just step by step what we went through. And that went out in 1997. And then 98, I had an opportunity to do an interview with Princess Diana from Beyond the Grave on the 1-year anniversary of her death. Kind of a paranormal tabloid in London had called my agent and asked if I could do that. And though they didn't want the interview, my agent and I went on we made this list like, well, what other famous dead people might have something to say? And in my head, I would go to them, Elvis, and he'd be like, no, I get in too much trouble. And, Mother Teresa.
I'm still alive. I can't talk to you.
You're right. So when we got to John Kennedy and did his interview with him, he said to us, we'll tell you who's going to be next, because you made your list, but we are already working on this and we need you to take this translation. So that's when Einstein came up. And I mean, who doesn't love Einstein? But he wasn't on our list, and I wasn't into science or math or anything. But when I channeled him, speaking him, it was the voice of all my channeling. And it was a pretty big turning point in my.
So you discovered that the downloads that you were getting, that was the voice of Einstein, the being of Einstein, the consciousness of Einstein, for people to understand. And what you're saying is that world peace can come through a collective consciousness of being in peace ourselves.
Yes. And
one of us.
The only person that you have to be concerned with is you. It's like, you don't have to worry if everybody else is going to do this. You don't have to think that you need to have a big movement, although it's much better, of course, when we're all doing it together and synchronistically, but it begins here. And I think a lot of people underestimate the power of the work that we do in those private moments when it's the hardest, when you're slogging through deep emotion and you're trying to figure out what to do with your intellect, and your intuition is telling you this, but your intellect is doing that. That work is what the angels say. The byproduct will be world peace, will be the macrocosm, just like the waitress. The byproduct of our work. And if we all do it more, exponentially together, of course, I think but it happens instantaneous. It's not like, all of us here have done the work for so long. And sometimes there's been times when you think, is it ever going to end? Or, we slog through stuff. But when we do it and when we get it, it's an instantaneous revolutionary change that can happen in a moment, like the shift of that perspective. And so my mission, it has been to take all of this information, because when I met Einstein, finally, I fell in love with him and I said, let's do a book just for you. I don't know what he was going to say. I didn't have any preconceived ideas of what he was going to say. I just knew that I loved him and that it was a 100-year anniversary of E equals MC squared. And what he told me was he died. He went into afterlife. He figured out not only the mechanics of afterlife and how it works, how creation is manifest, but then he includes these maps of human consciousness, very simple 3 human dimensions that we work with, that we're all familiar with, but they align in a particular way that he's articulated. And then a process to align ourselves to compassion. And what he says is compassion is a scientific, quantifiable, 5th fundamental force of the universe. It is the creative intelligence that uses the other 4 fundamental forces to impel the creation of the physical world one step at a time.
And
So,
what are the 4 forces?
Oh, the 4 fundamental forces are electromagnetics. And understand that when we talk about a fundamental force, and again, I'm not a scientist, but from this, what I perceive is that electromagnetics has an effect on energy. It makes energy do something. So electromagnetics sort of ignites things. And gravity is the second, and that guides things. And the strong nuclear force, I guess for lack of a more creative words, is the attraction and the repelling that takes place. And the weak nuclear force is the transformative force. So the things that you turn 2 to 3 or turn red to green, that kind of changing. So compassion is the 5th fundamental force. And in explaining this to me in that book that winter, I channeled and edited and realized it's like, you're telling me not just the unified field theory, but you're also showing why conflict revolution scientifically works. The map of the unified field and of human consciousness, you can see why when we change it in this part of the wave, then this manifests differently. And it's all explained in great detail. And that has taken lots and lots and lots of presentations around the world and input from all kinds of people in many different countries as I present the unified field and conflict revolution. And then we studied, like, what is this? Could this be? And so it's really evolved from when I first started automatic writing in 1987, and they said, we are sound. That's who I asked, who are you? They're like, we're sound. Okay, well, whatever. To now a unified field theory with maps of human consciousness and a scientific definition of compassion. And I just got to speak very briefly at the Science of Consciousness conference in Arizona in April at the University of Arizona, Tucson, with all the really far left brain scientists, with all of their mathematical calculations about how matter manifests and what is consciousness. And I came away feeling more confident than ever that this is indeed what it appears to be. And it's certainly holding up through time. It's only getting better.
I'm just listening to you and I'm riveted by what you're talking about, the 5 fundamentals and of how the earth works and how everything pulls together. And, and it, if you look up the 5 fundamentals, it's very, very science, like it's very, okay, it's gravity, it's like nuclear energy, it's all these things that, you typically would think. But then when you go back to even deeper fundamentals, when it comes down to human beings and living beings as a whole, we're all part of that. Right? So we're all part of that big big equation. So how we,
Yes.
right?
And that's his map of human consciousness.
Yes.
That is super important. We have the map of the compilation of consciousness in the earth and the gravitational waves. But then there's the 3 human dimensions, the 3 dimensions that make us have this human experience, which are emotion, intuition, and intellect. And like the heart, the lungs, the kidney, they each have their own function, their own form. But in his model of aligning to compassion means that the emotion is flowing up and informing the intuition. And then the intuition is forming the intellect, where free will is activated. You don't make the waves don't come out of your heart to put your hand on the wheel to turn left. It's an intellectual function, but it's informed by intuition. So what Einstein says is all conflicts in the world, manifestation of them, is because between the intellect and the intuition. If you got to the root of every single human conflict in the world, it would be that intellect is overriding the intuitive voice, which is the voice of compassion, which is the next most advantageous step for the good of the whole, always impelling us for that. And, there's the subatomic, like beat, heart, that's an intuitive impelling, the voice of compassion, bringing us this life. So when I heard that for the first time, that is the root of every single conflict, I was like, no, very skeptical. Like, how could that be? And then I started to think about it, and think about if everyone had the mechanism to train your intellect to just do what that voice of compassion tells you to do. Oh, I can't do that. I've never done it. Or, how many times have we heard rest? And then our minds are going, oh, I can't rest. I've got, 75 things to do. And we make the decision and off we go. And then we wonder why was my backache? Or, how come my boyfriend's, you know what I mean? It's like, we don't listen. And so our conflict revolution is about training ourselves one person at a time. You train you, I'll train me. And I can tell you, just from being this person who's founded it and researched it and lives it every single day, is that it is everything he ever told us. It is everything he ever told us.
Is intellect tied to our egos? And that is therefore why we don't listen to our intuition, because our egos are overriding it. And that greed, power, control, all those very narcissistic tendencies. And some people just go with it. They're horrible, and they're the ones who start the wars. There's no voice saying, they're not hearing that voice of intuition, right? They're ignoring it. Is that what's happening?
Yes.
Yeah.
And all of us, it's like the great reveal for all of us. Like, yes, those leaders, but you, like, how often in a day do you override your intuition? And when we revolve the focus back to us, where our power is, people they're like, oh no, no, I'm not that way. But this is where our power is. If you're creating it, you can uncreate it and you can recreate it. That's the good news. And I always tell people, you don't have to stop being a control freak. It's just when you start to control what is yours to be in charge of, you're in charge of your thinking. You're in charge of what decisions you make. You're in charge of how you process your emotion. You're in charge of how much you're going to listen to your intuition. I mean, we're so 100% in charge of this, but people we're getting it. I think there's a lot of studies and practices and insights and philosophies that bring it all together. But now is the time where we have to put it in our body and start to do it.
So what do we say? What do we say to the people that might be watching or have turned it off already? That this is not replacing God or Jesus or any of their religious ways or thinking. This is a higher than that. Is that not correct? It's all encompassing. I might be getting that,
No, I would
the
say
ways-
that it's, let me put it this way. I had a client read my Imagining Einstein book, the first Einstein book. And she wrote me back and she said, "Oh my gosh, my husband and I, we have never shared a spiritual practice. And that was the one thing that was really missing. And this information is the science of spirit, or the spirit of science. It's the integration of the two. And what compassion, with the capital C, the fifth fundamental force, is the all-encompassing meaning of the goodness of every religion, whether it's, if Jesus is your God, or Allah is your God, or just goodness is your God, whatever, nature is your God, whatever is your God, at the root of it is compassion. And if it's not, then who wants to be practicing or a part of that if it's not about love? And I think that's where religions have certainly gone wrong historically, the Crusades, etc. But yeah, so it isn't. It doesn't replace anything. And even when I teach conflict resolution, if we're going to sort of leave behind the scientific theorems and go just right to the process, which can be trained very simply and very easily without even having to know it. As my friend said, people don't know how, they don't need to know how the lawnmower works in order to cut the grass. It's like, okay, is that when we each do it for ourselves and have those miraculous, tiny baby step outcomes. The waitress at the club, that was a tiny little, didn't even mean anything to me. I mean, that was the beginning of watching these kinds of changes and how that radiates outward then, and our circles increase of the influence that we have to have that world peace. But it's got to start with our awareness and mastery of ourselves.
What's interesting is that we're talking about, how we sometimes we need to go back and look at our intuition, right? And we're going back to ourselves. So I read a book, one of my favorite books, and it was a life lesson for me, was that the book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. And it was all about the power of thinking without thinking. And I've noticed that when I'm in a position where I just go with my heart, or I don't even overthink it or overanalyze it, my choices that I make are probably more in line with what I need to be doing at that particular moment. So in terms of being conscious about how my effect is with each other around me, but every single thing I do, when I start overthinking or overanalyzing or second guessing, is when I make the mistakes, is when the emotions get to me, when I'm like, to your point, if I've not allowed myself the time to rest and meditate and just relax and get in tune with myself, and understanding that if I can trust that my core heart and what I'm trying to do each and every day is about being in a place of compassion, of love, and belonging. So if I trust that and allow my decisions without overthinking and how I present myself, then I know I'm doing the right thing. And I know there's a lot of people that, are very faith driven, that follow us, and we have, quite a strong Christian fellowship in this community. But for me, when I come up and wake up every morning, I want to make sure that I can also end my day with a grin, knowing I've done the right behaviors. Sometimes I regret, and I start self-doubting myself, but that's because I'm overthinking, to your point, or I'm taking too much external information to me, and that's when the noise has to stop. I think that's I think what we're living with today is we have so much noise and confusion and fear that we're in a position of not, this is just my interpretation of everything, and but if we go back to our roots, go back to where we were, when we woke up in the morning and we had a good thought, then we get distracted by our phones, or the stress, or the to-do list, or I didn't pay my rent yesterday, or like all the things that deviate us from going the now, which is what I think, if we dealt with the now, we wouldn't have to worry about it too much. And that's what I'm trying to get better at. And this is what my journey has been this year, is trying to get better at the now. Yes, I think about everybody, Claudia is on the call and a few other people are on the call. They know I like to plan ahead. But that's because I have a vision, and I know my vision, it will get there when I just go with my initial gut. And when I second guess it, that's when I stumble. So I hope that makes sense from where I'm trying to understand your message today, is that if we can go back to not allowing the fear and the noise and the turmoil and all the stuff that we see on social media, and like every time I put on YouTube or have a conversation with somebody, I get distracted by the noise, right? And I've got to come back to just that moment of silence. And once that moment of silence goes there, I'm calm, I'm happier, and that radiates. I think that radiates with everybody else around us.
Isn't that radiating effect? Like if I chant love, 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 and I get that feeling of love, I think of somebody I love, and it just comes from my core, and it radiates beyond me, beyond my physical body, and it extends out. This is part of this quantum theory that everybody's talking about now, is that wave, that instead of the particle, be the wave. So then that energy field reaches other people and touches other people, right?
Yes, and be both. You're both the wave and the particle.
Oh, be both.
Yeah, you're in the operating system. We call it the new operating system of this unified field. You are a wave, you are a particle, and you're everything along your own wave that's spinning around from the center of the planet. But
so if you have a bunch of waves that are negative, there's negative emotions wrapped up within that particle, and that the waves of energy that come out from that particle, that being, that person, that then affects the next person that they're standing next to, because they're being a bitz, as my mom would say. They're being awful, they're being greedy, they're being egotistical, whatever. And then you feel it, and you can see that in groups, right? One person gets negative, and then everybody else jumps in, and you can see how conflict starts.
yes,
Because we get into this group think, but it's not group think about all light and love. It's group think about dark and horrible.
well, admit that. I mean, we're all projecting the world. I mean, just forget any judgmental part of it. Like, you're projecting on me, just as a function of being real. Our energy is coming from the center of the planet, this gravitational wave with the 3 human dimensions, bursting into what we call the lens. This is where we experience the separation, and separating it out, and our bodies are projecting and perceiving. And that wave continues on till it reaches the edge of the Earth's electromagnetic field, goes back down into the North Pole, back down into the center, which is a black hole, by the way. I remember when Einstein first told me that, I was very skeptical. What? But nowadays, if you look it up, it's very much the thing in science now, that everything starts in a black hole. But in any case, we are projectors by nature. So I always say it's the difference between quitting smoking and dieting. You can't stop eating, but you have to understand and know what you're eating. You have to know what you're thinking. You have to know what you're feeling. And the other thing that we do that I think is really important is, you said there's negative emotions. For us, there are no negative emotions. There are anger, and there is depression, and there is all of that, what is traditionally called negative. But what happens is, it flows up on that wave, and it informs intuition, and intuition is going to tell us something to take care of ourselves. And then when it gets into the intellect, it's when that anger or depression marries itself to the thoughts that, oh, I'm no good, or this is going to happen, and then and it forms that reality, and that's what it is. So we strive to separate the two, process all the emotion more through breath and bypassing thought, or funneling into, I have gotten to where I do my biggest intentions. When I'm triggered by people that piss me off, I start to breathe and I use that energy to set that intention that Einstein's going to win the Nobel Prize posthumously. You know, we can channel those emotions into different thoughts. But that's when it becomes degenerative. That's when it starts to project into the lens as conflicts.
I agree on there are no negative emotions. Like every emotion has a purpose. It's just depending on how you channel it. So that makes a lot of sense to me to feel it without necessarily adding a thought or story to it, which is what solidifies it, because that's when we get into the ego. And when we can use that into because like anger serves a purpose. Like like healthy anger helps us set boundaries, right? It's our indicator that a boundary has been crossed. I would say even sadness. Sadness is about letting go. It's really helpful to be sad when you experience loss, because it helps like move grief. So I think where we get in trouble is when our emotions get paired with like narratives or stories, or we go into judgment. Like once we go into this is good and this is bad, that's where we get lost. And that's where emotions get stuck, because emotions are really just meant to be felt, and can be channeled appropriately. So I'm with that. Yeah, so I've just been quiet because I guess this all makes sense to me. So I'm just like processing and hearing. And it was interesting you talked about, and I'm curious, Barbara, so being a medium myself, I was feeling a force around me, and I got a vision of Einstein. I'm like, okay, cool. But I saw a wormhole. Does that mean any, like, has he ever talked to you about wormholes at all in any of your channels?
Well, the wormhole visual, I don't know about if there's a definition, like a scientific definition of what a wormhole means, but when you say wormhole, I picture this traveling. It's almost like
Yeah.
movement through the quantum fields.
Okay.
And I think that when you see the unified field and you see the
Of course.
the wave,
Yeah.
the lens, the spinning string, it is the wormhole. It is that transformational, like we all do this analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly, right? There's that time where you're just, if we would be conscious during the time that the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, we'd be like, acid would be melting our faces down and we would become these other creatures. So I think that works into the map, certainly.
Interesting. Yeah, because I got that visual. I was like, oh, I wonder what that's about. But also, I think another thing I want to reflect on was when we talk about, I think we need to be I think more and more, I think there's people in pain and then people who have healed their pain. So I think even being, this positive and negative can make associations in our mind, same thing like morality, good, bad, which can often take us out of unity. Because if when we think about unity and all is one, right? And yeah, there's certain things that we can do that are helpful and certain things that we can do as harmful. But I think when we are coming from intuition, we can have compassion for it all, but we can also have boundaries as well. And I think when it comes to things like greed and all that stuff, it all comes from fear. Like, this idea that domination is the only way of survival, versus trusting that intuition, that if you follow that intuition, because in order for us to even follow that intuition, to access that, we also need to calm our mind and calm our bodies. And I know from in my own journey, I had to, I mean, I've always had a pretty strong intuition, but often when I had a lot of chaos in my mind and in my body, that intuition was more or less was harder to access. But the more that I healed my traumas and really like became like a clearer channel or a clearer conduit, have my cells be in alignment with love, which is expansive and free. When I didn't have as much pain in my body because I wasn't holding on to the stories of my past, my intuition, being intuitive and tapping into my intuition is so much easier. So I think when we look at these world leaders, it's a lot of their consciousness comes from fear, rather than abundance and the belief that we can all, that we can all have, and disconnection too, right? Because I mean, it's like us and them, and that's a sense of disconnection that starts with being disconnected to yourself. So I think if talking about world peace, like and around intuition, and I love the reflection around. I never thought about it that way. That intuition was like a reflection of the force of compassion, but it makes a lot of sense because that small still that voice is always really gentle. And I mean, unless you're really not paying attention and putting yourself in danger, your intuition will be like, don't go there. But even then, it's to take care of yourself, right? It's there to protect you.
With us in intuition it's always, because people are like, how do I know my intuition from my intellect? Okay, intuition, here's the definition. It never changes. It's a small, impelling. So it's not a statement, but sometimes I just use that to give it. So it's a small, impelling. It's telling you something to do. It's not describing. It's not analyzing. It's not judging. It's telling you to take a step. And it's one step. And it's for the good of the whole. So I did a workshop once and this woman said, okay, so kill my boyfriend, as a joke. But I analyzed it. Okay, it's small, it's impelling, it's one step. Is it for the good of the whole? Probably not. So that is an intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's describing, well, I should do this because it's going to be blah, 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 then you're ventured into intellect. But you know that using the breath, you can really get some separation. And I don't mean that from yourself, but just this beautiful voice of intuition, this massive amount of emotion that is our fuel. It's the manifestation of the world. And then the intellect, the wild horses. So yeah, it's a mastery to get that all aligned to compassion. But when we do, yeah,
I think in order to access, because the way I describe intuition as a feeling, but that feeling being different from emotion. So I think when we have a lot of locked emotions in our body, it can be a little more challenging to access that feeling. But when we're willing to feel the emotions in our body and let it actually flow through without judgment, without making it good or bad or wrong, our bodies can then become more aligned or clearer so that we can access our intuition. So I think emotion's actually a gateway. It isn't intuition, but it is a gateway to begin entering into our body, because like we can't think our emotions, we feel our emotions, and our emotion and our intuition is the way we access our intuition is feeling.
yes.
Barbara, you and I talked about doing something very interesting, and I know we have got about 10 minutes left. Hopefully we can squeeze this in. You're going to do a little channeling and ask Einstein a question I had. How do we bring the world together in peace?
All right. So let's take a few deep breaths as if they're not here already. We will command that only the most divine light shine down upon you at this time, and the greatest good be present here. We cannot tell you what an enormous joy this is to be here in your circle today. And we want to assure you that your circles are very, very vast. We do not want you to underestimate how much you have influence in the manifestation of what you experience in your world in a day. You are the root of that experience. You have the power of the source at your fingertips, in your body, in your emotion, your intuition, your intellect, the part of you that witnesses yourself. And we draw your attention to these things because your question is, how do you bring together the world? And our singular mission, which has been for lifetimes, but in particular decades, is to help people understand and experience that when you do that work within is when you then change the manifestation without. So in the case of world leaders, what you're saying is absolutely true. The people who are in power at this time have a disconnection from their compassion, from their intuition. And it's, whether you see it or not, it's not only killing them, but you're watching the degenerative systems fall because they can't support what needs to be arising right now, which is for the good of all. So you have these spectacular seats at this time, a monumental time in human history, to watch and influence this transformation. So in bringing people together, when you start with yourself, you will begin to understand why we say that, because that's where all your power lies. But what happens is your intellect will tell you, well, how is being nice to the woman at the coffee shop, or how is feeling these difficult feelings and breathing them through, how is that making a difference in the macrocosm, in the hearts of those world leaders? It's because when you change it within and you mirror the theoretics of those world leaders, not all of you are at all evil intenting, but when your intellect takes over the system, we say evil is when you make decisions for the good of the few at the expense of the many. And while we mean that in the macrocosm with world leaders, we also mean it in the microcosm of your three human dimensions. When intellect and ego make a decision that override the voice of intuition, it makes a decision for the good of the few itself at the expense of the many, intuition and emotion, and the whole system. And therefore, it becomes degenerative. That is not a judgment. That is a description of what happens to the energy. It starts to be degenerative, things start to break down, conflicts begin to arise. But when you make decisions for the good of the whole, internally, yourself, one person at a time, you have so much power to influence the macrocosm, but you have to be childlike and believing in magic and trusting in yourself. It's you need to trust in. It's you need to know. So as you bring yourself together and align to your own compassion, you radiate out and you change by looking outward rather than cowering at the externals that are coming at you through your intellect. No, you must empty your mind, align it to true north, to 0 degrees of separation from your compassion, and align all of your emotion and your intuition to thoughts of compassion, to thoughts of the greatest good. And after that, then you can intend, what is it that you want to do to make the world a better place? Well, we don't have to ask many people here. You are already fully passionately engaged in those things, and you bring even more power then to those external activities and projects and missions that you go on when you start within yourself. So do not underestimate the power of the work. Okay.
Gorgeous. I love it.
Well, that went by rather quickly.
So that was Einstein, or the group that you're channeling, talking to us, correct?
Yes, you know, the party started out as these 12 famous dead people working in Afterlife for World Peace, but since that time, this is it's like a football stadium. And who wouldn't, upon your passing, want to find that place where this people are working for world peace and afterlife, headed up by Einstein? There's a lot of activity.
Do you think that as more of us align to our true north, that we pull other people along with us, so we bring them along so that they start to I'm going to say hear voices, or, you know, I'm not a medium. I have friends that are mediums, so I'm not, you know, I'm empathic. I believe in a lot of things that are possible. You know, I'm very open-minded. So is that possible that we're going to lift all the boats, right? Just by doing our work, doing our inner work, and then doing the work for the greater good. You know, for instance, what I do, what Gillian's doing, what Sheela's doing, what numerous people, including yourself, are doing. You get up every day to focus on something that's going to help somebody else.
Yes, and it's like your husband, who has, from what I understand, invented some incredible tools and devices that work in a really regenerative way. It cuts down on the amount of everything that you need, and it increases. So that's really regenerative. And that's kind of what we do with ourselves when we do this work. Then suddenly, we've all done it, where synchronicity starts to happen, and it seems like you're just like, hey, here's what I need, and then here it comes, or everything's falling into place. And that's how we're supposed to be living. We're just rediscovering it, I think.
Yeah, John actually, the inventor of Crop Circle Farm and Garden Systems, shameless plug for him. And the reason Growing to Give is here, working for the greater good with other groups that are trying to feed the world. He started getting these, what he calls downloads now, in the middle of the night. It would wake him up. They're, you know, not necessarily voices, but he could, it was like he was being shown things. And so he has this ability to think of something and spin it around in his mind as if he was spinning it around on a program on the computer, so he could see all, you know, it's like a 3D vision of whatever he was being told to invent. You know, it's you know, it's from spirit. He always talks about that. Will more and more people find that starting to happen to them? I mean, he now, you know, gets these downloads, you know, in the shower, swimming, walking, you know, just all day long, right? And it's just amazing. It is like he's got a team working with him, and it's coming from somewhere. These are ideas that, you know, all of a sudden he has. They come out of the ether. It's amazing.
You asked me something earlier about, you have Christians and people who are very devoted to Jesus, and Jesus came here, died, rose, came back and talked to everybody, came back to talk to all the ones he loved, and they talked to him. And so we're moving into this time where this is not some weird thing. It's how scientifically matter manifests. And when you see the unified field and you realize, oh, this is afterlife, you can see it on the map. This is how it works. Einstein's riding my wave in his dark matter that has still compiled after his body died. It becomes where we're going. Is you don't have to, of course you mourn the passing of someone who's died, but they're still there, they're still available, they're still learning, they're still growing, just in a whole different form, probably more like a dream state than our hard physical reality. So I think more and more, especially because, I started this in the 80s and it was very edgy ideas that are now so many people like yourselves, beautiful young women who get this. It's beautiful. Well, men too, not to say there's no men, but it seems like it's a big sorority sort of.
It does seem. We do have a few guys that are on our team. And
All right, well, thank you, Barbara, for just sharing your wisdom with us today. It's always nice to see different perspectives or like alternate perspectives from every single opportunity to share the good. This is what we need. Ultimately, we're all on this earth to try to, like, I believe we are innately, like you said, beings of compassion. It's just what happens when we get confused or get stretched and lose our way or not exactly get the guidance that we typically should be needing, and we get influences by external forces that stop us from being the best versions of ourselves, but they're also giving the best to output for what we can give to everybody. So what, it's interesting. I did a lot of research on Tauruses and Tauridal community, like all of the forces that align when it comes to energy, and how it all spirals back. And we're all part of that Taurus collective when it comes to, regardless of what being you are. And I'm telling you right now, regardless of where you come from or your viewpoint, I believe that innately we are all good. We are. From the minute can you tell me when you give birth to a baby, do you think the baby's actually first instinct is to hurt somebody? No, it's only when we condition them or expose them to environments that changes their innate goodness. So, and to Sheila's points about, when you start feeling good and you start coming to terms about allowing yourself to feel good, and you heal yourself from whatever trauma you've been exposed to, and you give yourself that permission and quietness and reflect, and you go back to your inner self. This is why it's really important to even doing what we're doing right now. There's a bunch of us right now, Barbara, that are doing a detox, and I always find doing a detox is a very spiritual experience. Not only do I shed off weight, yeah, everybody wants to do it because they want to lose weight, but I almost like I'm cleaning out all the stuff that's stopping my body from being its best self. Like I'm just getting rid of the external influences, including toxins that we may inhale mentally, body and mind. Like we have this innate ability to have that stuff stick to our bodies, but stick to our brains, stick to our feelings. And then once we shed it, it is extremely emotional. It's extremely freeing, So the idea of even just doing something as a detox where you're cleaning out your body is not just that. We're cleaning out stuff that we've been carrying for so long, and then going back to our center where we feel good. That's after you've gone through that process, you just want to share it. Like you just want to go out there, share that goodness, and that just explodes. And then goes back to like the whole feel good, share good, do good. That's exactly how this started. I did a detox. I, let go of things that weren't serving me. I basically walked away from an environment that was too chaotic and stressful in my life. And I needed to do something to heal me. My journey is maybe different from everybody's journey, but what I needed to do was shed off the stuff that I was carrying that was not allowing me to serve others. And then by doing so, we created this platform, and and I want to thank you for tonight, and, giving us another conversation to have that talks about how to make you feel good, and but how you can pay that forward to others. So I appreciate that. And, I do want to mention that on that note, we do have a few things happening, and you make sure you follow feelgoodsharegood.com, and also go to our Facebook page. All the episodes soon are going to be uploaded onto YouTube and Rumble and BitChute. But for now, please watch the lives. This is where you get to see the real, uncut versions, and get to see the before, like beginning to the end conversations with our wonderful hosts. So thank you, everybody.
Barbara, is there a last word you'd like to leave the viewers with?
I just think don't underestimate your power. Don't underestimate in the course of a day how much you can change your perspective and make a huge difference in your own life and the life of people around you.
You bring a presence to the team that we will really enjoy, and you're teaching us all something. You're making us all think. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things that we don't do as a group, a world group, a universal group, is we don't think. We are spoon-fed what others want us to think, and we go along with it. But I do believe that there is an opportunity for world peace. I believe that we're going into a time of world peace as more and more of us become part of that collective consciousness and be understanding of the part we play in world peace. And I think that those that are still trying to hang on to the power and control and are still greedy guts, they're being exposed for who they are and how they affect the world. So I want to say thank you. You can find Barbara With at synergyalliance.llc. So everybody, synergyalliance.llc. So with that, I'd like to say goodnight, everybody, and stay real to heal.